Welcome back to another video. My name's Carl Gosling and today I'm going to answer a question, or at least give my opinion on the answer to a question that is still really commonly asked, and that is, if you have a Oculus Rift CV1, is it worth upgrading to the Rift S for sim racing? Now this whole video is specifically about sim racers. It's not about VR in general, it's just about sim racing, because sim racers need perhaps things that normal VR games players don't, and vice versa. So an example of that would be if you're a sim racer, you don't use hand tracking of any sort, well, controller tracking, sorry, not actual hand tracking. You don't use these for anything. So the tracking of the headset itself is all that's important. Now, on this Rift S, of course, it's inside-out tracking. I'm sure everyone knows this, but in case you don't, there's cameras dotted around the front that monitor the world around you, and that's how it tracks your position. With the CV1, there's no cameras on the head-mounted display itself. The cameras are fixed around the room. Now, from a sim racing point of view, that's absolutely fine, and it makes for an easier setup. You haven't got to run cameras around the room. You can just plug your Rift S into your PC, set up your settings, and away you go. But technically, inside-out tracking is inferior to outside-in tracking. You know, everyone talks about when you move your controllers behind your back or behind the back of your head, of course, they lose tracking after a little while. This is completely true, but for sim racing, it's completely irrelevant because your hands are on steering wheel, on your gear shifter, pulling your handbrake, whatever your hands are going to be doing. So from that point of view, the tracking advantage the CV1 has over the Rift S doesn't matter. The second thing I want to talk about is the audio. Everyone knows, if you've been looking into this, in the last 12 months, the Rift S has pretty terrible sound. Now, some people are going to say, "Oh, my Rift S sounds fine." It sounds fine until you hear something better. It's like having a 42-inch television and you think it's great, there's no problems with it, and then you go in your mate's house and they bought an 85-inch television. All of a sudden, your television isn't as good anymore. And it's the same with the audio on the Rift S. If you've never heard a VR headset with good sound, like the CV1, like the Valve Index, then you'll think your Rift S sounds just fine, unless, of course, you're a headphone wearer anyway, in which case you've got to instantly go, bloody hell, where's all the bass? Because that's really what it lacks. It lacks low end, it lacks mid-range. They're basically a couple of tweeters in there, so not the best for sound. Now, for me as a sim racer, I don't use headphones. I have a surround sound system here in my front room, so I have my audio coming out of that. So again, if I was to go with the Rift S, I wouldn't care that the audio was crap, because I would just turn it off anyway, which is what I do even with my CV1, and I use my surround sound system, so that wouldn't be an issue. And of course, if you are a headphone wearer, I know a lot of you guys who like to sim race do wear over-ear headphones. Again, you ain't got to worry about it, because you're going to be using those as well as your Rift S, or you can choose to use those as well as your Rift S. So again, the poor sound isn't really an issue. You can fit there's some AKGs fitted to this one here, which give you sort of similar performance to what you get on the CV1 and the Valve Index. They both have really good sound. So yeah, again, if you're going with the Rift S for sim racing, bad audio doesn't matter. The not quite as good tracking doesn't matter. And again, let's not get into a debate about internal tracking versus external tracking. It's simple physics. Cameras, 3 or more cameras dotted around the room looking in at you will always track better than cameras pointing out. It's just simple physics. But sim racing tracking doesn't matter. For sim racing, the audio probably doesn't matter to most of us, because you won't be using them anyway. Third thing I want to talk about is the refresh rate. The Rift S has a refresh rate of 80 Hertz, and this is where I'm going to sort of pause and say we've got our first real negative versus the CV1 or say a Valve Index. The 80 Hertz refresh rate is 10-11% less, possibly even 12% less than the CV1's refresh rate. Now, if you've ever played on a 60 Hertz monitor and then gone to a 120 Hertz monitor, the difference is massive. I'm not going to say whether you'll race better necessarily on 120 Hertz, but everything just feels that bit crisper, that bit sharper, that bit more responsive. So perhaps for some, you may race a little better. For others, maybe it makes no difference. This probably depends on your level of skill as well. If you're really up there, then you'll probably take advantage of that faster frame rate. So Rift S, 10-12% slower on the refresh rate. I mean, still more than a 60 hertz monitor, so that a lot of us use. So not a bad refresh rate by any means, but it is less than the CV1 and some other headsets, but still perfectly usable. What else we've got to talk about? Oh yes, next one on the list will be resolution. Now here is where the Rift S stands head and shoulders above the CV1. I'll put up some screenshots comparing the two now. So these are through the camera screenshots from another channel. Tyrell Woods does great VR content. Check him out. But he also does great through the lens content comparing VR HMD. So this is where I've robbed that from. I hope you don't mind, mate. Big shout out to you. But yeah, as you can, now this is a funny thing. In these clips or screenshots, the difference doesn't look massive. The resolution of the Rift S over the CV1. But the reality of it is, when you've got the two and you can go from one to the other, the difference is really quite noticeable. You can see a lot more detail in the distance, signs by the side of the track, just overall detail. And this is something that I find particularly important because on a lot of the smoother circuit-based races that we'll all be doing, there isn't a lot going on. And if you can't see in the distance too clearly where the track's headed, it can be a little bit, not confusing, but it's not as clear as it could be. And that's something I noticed straight away with the increased resolution. That clarity in the distance makes a big difference to the overall experience. Now, you can use super sampling if your graphics card is powerful enough, and that will really help with this on the CV1. It will really sharpen it up quite noticeably. If you can use 1.5 times or even 2 times super sampling, then that will really sharpen it up. But the same then applies to the Rift S. The Rift S isn't such a high resolution that there's no point super sampling. It's noticeably more, but it's not massively more. So you can apply your super sampling to the Rift S and you'll still get an increase in clarity, as well. But that does apply to both. But this is definitely where the Rift S stands out from the CV1 and the earlier HTC head-mounted displays as well. And again, talking about resolution, with increased resolution comes reduced screen door effect. If you're not sure what screen door effect is, I've got a video explaining that, so take a peek. Screen door effect, to make it very quick, is like someone's put a mesh over your eyes and you're looking through it. So you'll see vertical lines and horizontal lines across your whole field of view. So the more pixels you squeeze into the same size space, the smaller the gap between the pixels, which is what these lines are that you see. So the Rift S, higher resolution, reduced screen door effect. It also has an RGB sub-pixel display versus an OLED one on the CV1. So the pixels are not only, there's more of them, they're smaller as well, which again helps to reduce this screen door effect. The most noticeable times I see this is in something like Dirt Rally, when you're on a snowy stage and everything's white pretty much. That's when you see this black grid, this black screen door effect on the CV1, way more than you do on the Rift S. It's still present on the Rift S, but it's greatly reduced. So again, this is a big plus for the Rift S over the CV1 as far as visual fidelity and clarity goes. Then we can talk about, I suppose, the colour and the contrast ratios. An OLED panel is always going to be better from that point of view than an LCD panel is going to get richer blacks, deeper blacks, because the pixels can actually turn off, versus the Rift S, where things only can go to grey. It's literally as dark as they can go. But it's not something you notice, in the heat of battle, so to speak. And unless you're directly going from one to the other, like I have been, it's not a big deal. It's no different to having an LCD TV at home and then, again, someone else having an OLED panel in their house. When you go around their house, you might go, oh yeah, those blacks are a bit deeper. But when you come home and you've forgotten about that one, you're not disappointed by your own TV. It still looks decent. Same thing here. So it's not the end of the world. So I think really, well, I suppose, yeah, should we compare prices? You can pick CV1s up. Obviously, second hand these days is the only option because they've been superseded by the S. Pick them up for as little as 120 quid. So, pretty cheap if you haven't got VR and you want to. Rift S is second hand. I've seen as low as 240. So, 120 quid more. Not a massive leap if you do want the Rift S with the clearer visuals. And this really is where we should conclude which one I prefer, for sim racing. And the answer really has to be the Rift S for sim racing. To be honest, in all other circumstances, if I didn't have a CV1, I'd probably buy the Rift S because it's an easier package. But I have a CV1, I would never upgrade to a Rift S. The leap in visual fidelity isn't that great. And for any application other than sim racing, the CV1, in my opinion and experience, is a better overall experience. But for sim racing, the Rift S takes the win for me. The sharper visuals, couple that with some super sampling, the reduced screen door effect, and that's really what's important to us as sim racers, what we're seeing in front of us. Dropping 10 hertz on the refresh rate, not the end of the world, perfectly fine and manageable, still better than a 60 hertz monitor. And the tracking, of course, is fine because we're not using controllers. It's just our head that needs to be tracked. So that's really my thoughts on it. There will be links to both of these in the description if you fancy picking one up. Second hand off of eBay. There's some great bargains out there. Definitely worth a look. CV1 especially, they go for pennies these days. And especially as there's a shortage. This is a bit of a tricky one actually because of the coronavirus holding up production in China and other places. There is a bit of a shortage of Oculus products. So yes, eBay and the likes is your only sort of place you might find one. Hopefully people aren't there trying to rob you blind because of this shortage. I don't think, you certainly won't find that happen with the CV1, but you might find people with Rift S's. I'll try, because they're still the most current Oculus headset bar the Quest. I'll try and perhaps rob you a little bit, but take a peek, see what you can find. There's always some buggers around if you look long enough. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Rift S for sim racing and sim racing alone, definitely the way to go versus a CV1. If you've got a CV1, it isn't worth the upgrade. Hold on a bit longer, wait until something similar to the Valve Index in spec is available for a more affordable price. That's still a very expensive setup to go with. I know they've improved their controllers now, so they shouldn't be failing all the time like they were. But it's still £1,000, which is double or more than double what a Rift S retails at. So I'm holding out because I hate the audio on the Rift S. The tracking is noticeably worse in certain situations, not for sim racing, than what the CV1 is, and the CV1 is also more comfortable in my opinion. So I'm waiting for something similar to the Valve Index in performance, visuals, audio, and to appear on the market for a slightly better price than £1,000, or maybe even for the Index to come down a little bit before I upgrade. But anyway, I'm waffling on. It often happens. Yeah, for sim racing and sim racing alone, the Rift S is the one to go for over the CV1. If you don't already have a CV1. They're my thoughts. As always, thanks very much for watching. Have a good day and take it easy.